Welcome back to Project Prelim 2024. Today, let's check the questions from Indian polity as well as international relations. As you know, this is an important component in civil service general studies papers. The main paper 2 is entirely on this area, and Prelim also we get a lot of questions. Around 15 to 25 questions are there from both this part put together. So, we should start with the international relations part first, then we will move on to the Indian polity part. 10 questions is what we can expect from this international relations. So, this international relations, there are questions from different areas about places in news as well as international organizations. So, let's see what are the questions. There was a question on look east policy of India. This is from the foreign policy part. So, this question asked, I think it was in 2013 or something. Recently, there was no big questions from the Indian foreign policy part, but you may still get a question from, the foreign policy like the recent Act East policy or the Panchsheel or Gujarat Doctrine. So, just have an idea about India's foreign policy, but usually this is not a very important area for your prelims. Then the Southeast Asia and the how geopolitically it is a very important area. That was a question in the past. There was a question on Global Compact for Migration from last year. This is a very current important thing. So, most of the questions in your international relations segment are from the current happenings. Of course, you could get some questions on international groupings from the static part, but otherwise anything new, there is a much more possibility for that to come in the prelims. So, this was about this Global Compact for Migration and the other details. There was a question on the START treaty between Russia and USA in the past. Then there was a question on another pact between USA and European Union. So, international relations means it need not be something which directly have a bearing on India. It could be anything in the news in general. So, that's why you have this kind of questions. There was a question about the Arab Spring in Tunisia when it happened. There was a question on places and corresponding countries. Similar question from another year, all these places in news. Another similar question, the areas and respected countries. Then similar question, here you have only one area. The other question, it was more like the how many pairs are correctly matched type. Here you have only one. Then the countries which borders Afghanistan, again something from the current part. Then again about this refugee settlement in Uganda. Then the China and Japan's dispute over this island. Again, conflict areas and the correspondent countries. Then similarly, the provinces and the corresponding countries. Again, something from the current affairs. Then about the recent happenings in the world from different countries and what are the recent things which happened over there. Then about this military coup and the correspondent countries. Then a similar situation, and they want you to identify the country based on this information. Similarly, Yemen and South Sudan, again areas of famine. Similarly, ethnic communities and their respective countries, Rohingyas and Madheshi communities, which have a direct connection to India. Then there was a question on Vietnam in general about its economic prosperity and other kind of things. Then two-state solution related to Israel, and the Israel-Palestine conflict is also going on, so you could expect something from there. Then Israel and Arab countries, the present developments. Then there was an old question on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by UN. Then International Labour Organization, and that is the Conventions 138 and 182, which is related to child labour. The UN and related organization can be a potential question for your prelim as well as your mains. There was a question on the Beijing Declaration on women, a question on UN Habitat, then something on the UN Credential Committee, UN's Convention Against Corruption. These things, as I told you, particularly was asked because some new development in that particular year would have happened. Then UN General Assembly, some basic ideas about that, there was a question. Then UN Convention on Law of Sea, again it was in news that particular year. Then about Arctic Council, there was a question. So the regional groupings are other potential areas. The groupings in which India is a member, the groupings in which India has observer status, or something like this where India does not have any direct connection, all can be potential question. And most probably there could have been some recent development related to that, some meetings or some new conventions or anything of that sort. So that's where you have to pay attention. Then polar areas, International Maritime Organization's Polar Code. Another question on India's membership related to different organizations. Then about the BRICS group, which is very important for India. Another question on the BRIC summit, because that year there was a summit, and about that fertilizer declaration, there was this question. Then India is a member of East Asia Summit, but India is not member of ASEAN and APEC. So you should have a fair idea about the organizations which are important for India and organizations in which India has direct membership. Then the free trade partners of ASEAN, India is one of the partners, and which are the other countries? That was the question. So there is this question on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Then the India-Africa Forum Summit. International Solar Alliance, in which India is a prominent member. Then the Mekong-Ganga Cooperation. Indian Ocean Rim Association. All these things, India is a member actually. So it's very important. Then the Trans-Pacific Partnership, there was a question. The Cooperation Council for the Arab States, so the also known as the Gulf Cooperation Council, about the member states, there was a question. Then which among the following countries are members of G20? That was a question. Again there was a question on G20. So recently in India also there was this G20 meetings and all. So this year also we could expect a question from the G20 summits happened in India. Again G20 common framework, there is a question. So this year particularly among the groupings, I think this is one area, G20 is one area where you should pay particular attention. Then there was another question on the European Union's new law on data protection. Then the Stability and Growth Pact of European Union, there was a question. So European Union is a very important trade partner and all for India. So any new development happening over there, we should give attention. Action plan for prioritization and implementation of cooperation with Russia. So any new deal we sign with the big powers is also important. There could be a potential question on this in the mains as well. Then organization of Turkic state, again something in news. There was a question on this Amnesty International. There was a question on the Medicines Sans Frontiers, the Doctors Without Borders. Then, all these conventions and declaration and the associated areas. So you should have a fair idea about what all things are happening and which is related to which particular area. Then there is this question on the NPT treaty, a question on the additional protocol with the IAEA. Then another question on the nuclear suppliers group. So all these international groupings and organizations related to nuclear power is also of particular importance to India. Then another question on the nuclear security summit. Then this kind of some report also could be there, the rule of law index. So the economic organizations of the world as well as other political and environmental related organizations, they all publish a lot of reports. So you should have a fair idea about who published what. Then the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, that was again in news. Then Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, again something from current affairs of that year. First Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference, again that is from current affairs, because this was a 2016 question. Then the European Stability Mechanism, again from another question from European Union. One more question from European Union here related to the digital single market strategy. Belt and Road Initiative of China was a question. Then India developing Chabahar port and its importance. Then International Seabed Authority and India's license for mineral exploration, there was a question. Then International Mother Language Day by UNESCO and the story behind that. Then Water Credit Initiative by a US based NGO. The Global Ocean Commission. Right to the City, that's again a new initiative. So all these things, once again, let me repeat, this all comes in news. So when you check your current affairs thing, this is one area, particularly the international development is one area where you should pay particular attention. So that's all about international relations, and apart from a little bit information on the very basics, that is about the UN and different regional groupings and all, you should pay a close watch on what's happening. The Ministry of External Affairs website gives you very good insights on the new treaties and other kind of things, as well as the Ministry of External Affairs website have an excellent collection of newspaper articles. So for your mains also, that will be quite useful. So you can't exactly stick on to one textbook for your international relations. But once you keep track of this current happenings and having a basic idea about the members of different organizations and things like that, this segment won't be very difficult for you. Now let me move on to the polity segment. And a major part of your polity questions, you get up to 15 questions from this segment, and it is, constitution is your most important thing for this. You could stick to a book like Lakshmikant for your polity, and also you should keep track of latest happenings. But understanding the basics is very important when it comes to questions related to constitution. So let's see the questions. So what is a state? This is from the basic idea from the political science. So the definition of state was asked as a question last year. Then 26th January 1950, the day India became a republic. So what was the India's status on that day? That was the question last year. So a sovereign democratic republic. You may be knowing the word socialist and secular have been added much later. So the constitutional government is by definition a limited government because it put certain restrictions or obligations on the government. Due process of law means fair application of law. So you could see that a lot of questions are there based on the spirit of constitution. So what exactly each words in the constitution means. So when you study the initial part of the constitution, particularly when you study the preamble, then later the fundamental rights and directive principles, make sure that you understand the context in which it has been added in the constitution and generally what exactly these words, these phrases means. Also, for your mains actually, you may need to know about different interpretations of Supreme Court and the cases which are related to each of these particular terms. So once you are ready for your mains, once you done your revision based on the mains angle, writing the prelim part of political science becomes rather easy. Yeah, there was a question on prisons, how it is being managed, the Prisons Act. That was a bit too specific, I would say. Then, back to constitution here. As in the previous question, it define and limit the powers of government. Then constitutional amendment, the first amendment, there was a question. So it was believed to be enacted to overcome the judicial interpretation of the fundamental rights. So that's about the constitutional history there. Then the National Commission for Backward Class, which recently became a constitutional body. And many of the other national commissions are statutory bodies. They are not constitutional bodies. Then, the community reserves of, this was from the last year, when the government notify a place as a community reserve, what all things happen. This is to do with the, administration of tribal areas particularly. Then there was a question on, the scheduled areas and the notification. The largest administrative unit forming the scheduled area is the district and the lowest is the cluster of village. So, administration of scheduled areas, the schedule 5 and 6 is important. Then there was this question on Supreme Court of India from last year. So, about the policies made under Article 16(4), that gives you the the government the power to do the reservation and other kind of things. Then Article 335, the maintenance of efficiency of administration. So the comparison and how these two need to be considered when coming up with new legislations. That's the essence of that question. Then back to the values here. Democracy's superior virtue lies in the fact that it calls into the intelligence and character of ordinary men and women. So this kind of questions, the options could be a little bit confusing. So you have to pay particular attention and read each and every option before you arrive at a conclusion. So the principles of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is reflected in preamble, fundamental rights, directive principles and also the fundamental duties. Not a very difficult one. Then a very basic question, Satyameva Jayate is taken from this particular Upanishad called Mundaka Upanishad. There was a direct question, a simple question on preamble 1 year. Then another question on preamble, and preamble also is very much part of the constitution. That's what you have to understand from this question. Then again a question on that constitutional government you could see here. Then about citizenship there was a question. So, separation of power, the importance is to safeguard the liberty, separation of power between these three. Then liberty, equality and fraternity have been mentioned in the preamble itself. So, among the given choices, this was the most appropriate one. Then rights, whenever we say rights or particularly the fundamental rights, it's always against the state. So, it's state's responsibility to ensure that. So, whenever a fundamental right is violated, you put a writ and it is always against the state. That's the essence of this question. Then equality in society means absence of privileges. Another question, Article 14. So, anything which gives uncontrolled discretionary power in the matters of application of law, that directly violates Article 14, the right to equality. So, right to equality, another question. So, protection against untouchability is very much part of that. Yeah. So, Bharat Ratna and Padma Awards are not titles under Article 18. We have an abolition of titles in Article 18. So, the central government's duty to protect the states from, internal disturbance and of course external aggression. So, that was the essence of this. There was an element here related to the Prevention of Terrorism Act also. Then there was right to privacy, which is very much in news, and there was a lot of judgments there. That's directly, that right to privacy thing comes from Article 21. Then another question on Article 21. One's right to marry the person of one's choice is also comes under Article 21. Right against exploitation is there, Article 23, and Article 24, which particularly states about the child labor. So they both comes under this right against exploitation, part of fundamental rights. Then there was this question on minorities in India and the Prime Minister's program. Then there was this constitution and judicial review, there was a question. There was a question on directive principles. So directive principles, as you know, are the directions of governance. Based on that, we could form policies. There have been a lot of questions on this. So directive principles, again, they are not enforceable in itself, but they are very much important for the administration. So the separation of judiciary from the executive is also part of the directive principles. Promotion of international peace is also included there. Then economic justice mentioned in the preamble. You could see some of its elements in the directive principles. Then, the directive principles as well as the things related to local bodies, and of course the 7th schedule, which talks about the union, state and concurrent list, they all talk about education. So for this kind of a question, you have to pause for a second, then read it carefully, then you will be able to get to the answer. Then organization of village panchayat, promotion of cottage industries are the Gandhian principles from DPSP. There are socialist principles and other things as well. So Gandhian principles, these two are the most important ones. Then they are not enforceable. One more question on that. Then all these directive principles actually, gives the idea of a welfare state. Then some of the amendments here. 42nd amendment added this participation of workers to the DPSP. Then concentration of wealth is actually a violation of that. Then right to property, which was initially a fundamental right, is now only a legal right. Then Article 51A, fundamental duties, there was a question. Then one more question on fundamental duties about, they are not be enforced. Then we have a lot of questions on the presidents of India. and what are the reports which President has to ensure that which are put in front of Parliament. That was this question. Then President is the executive head and all the actions are taken in the name of President, but President himself is not making any laws. So similar question, executive power of President. Then election of President, the value of vote, there was a question. Then election of President, one more question, the much more in detail about the value of the votes of MLA. One more question on the election of President. So all the powers and responsibilities of a President, you should pay attention. Then again, the election of President is beyond the scrutiny of the Indian courts. That was also another question. Then the nominated members can vote in Vice President's election but not in the President's election. Again, President's power under Article 356, the what you call as the President's rule and the provisions related to that. Another question on the President's power. So Presidents can summon a session of Parliament. Then let's move on to the Prime Minister. So the criteria for a person to become Prime Minister, that was this question. Then Department of Personnel was constituted and comes directly under Prime Minister, that was a question. Council of Ministers, there was a question. There was a question on a Minister of State, you could see. There was a question on number of ministers. There was a question on members of cabinet who are supposed to be the members of Parliament according to laws in India. There was a form of cabinet, there was a question on the cabinet form of government. There was a comparison on the British and Indian parliaments, something from the basics. Then the parliamentary form of government, there was a larger question on its structure. Another question on the parliamentary system of government. You may be getting a question comparing India with the USA as well, which have a presidential form of government. Then Indian Parliament, another question. Then we call it as a parliamentary system of government because the Lok Sabha is directly elected by the people. A question on Parliament again, how the laws are being made. Then leader of opposition, how it is being selected. Then there was a question on Lok Sabha Speaker. Another question on the election of Deputy Speaker of Lok Sabha. Then 9th schedule, which can protect a legislature from the judicial review. There was this question. A question on Council of Ministers, how the Parliament exercises control over there. Parliamentary control over public finance, there was this question. There was a question on the bills, different types of bills like money bill. So the business in Parliament, what all things happen inside a Parliament, you should have an idea about the terms and you should have an idea about how a bill becomes an act, etc. So Department of Economic Affairs in Ministry of Finance, they prepare budget. So about the process of budget also, you should have a fair idea about how it happens. So along with the budget, Finance Minister also places other documents. So it's about that in this question. Parliamentary committees, it's very important. Particularly, the Public Accounts Committee and Estimate Committee are very important. So Estimate Committee is also being asked. So the composition and the number of members and their powers are very important. Ad hoc committees by Parliament, there is this question. Then another question on the parliamentary committees here, because this would have been in news in that particular year. Then when the budget is not passed, obviously it shows that the government has lost confidence, so they have to resign. So So a private member's bill, which also comes in the news often, was a question. The MP's fund, the MP's funds on development. So regarding that, there was a question. There was a question of no confidence motion. So another question on no confidence motion. Then vote on account and interim budgets and things like that. Especially this year we could have a question like this because this is an election year. So the budget which we saw was an interim budget kind of thing. So we could expect a similar kind of question this year as well. So withdrawal of funds from the Consolidated Fund of India, again a similar area. So the federalism in India, this is very important for your mains as well. The center-state relationship and how the states and the central government functions. So this is a question from that area. Rajya Sabha and its special powers, there was a question. Then another question on Rajya Sabha. Then again Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha comparison. So Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, when it comes to money bill, how exactly it functions. Money bills, again there is a question. Adjournment motion. So you should know about all the other kind of motion. There are the calling attention motion, etc. So you should know about all these things and you could possibly get a question from any of them. So the constitutional amendments, there were questions. Then the important amendments, there are 3 types of constitutional amendment bills and you should know about that. Then the joint sitting of Parliament, what are the occasions? Then the Prevention of Disqualification Act, so that was another question. A bill is passed by a simple majority of a joint sitting. If a bill has been rejected by any house and if more than 6 months have elapsed, the president may summon a joint session. So that was another question. Then 5th and 6th schedule related to scheduled tribes, there was this question. Again related to 5th schedule, there was a question. Distribution of power between center and state, there was a general question. Then the 10th schedule which deals with the anti-defection law, there was a question. Then anti-defection law, there was one more question. Then Lok Sabha election and the eligibility of a person. Then similarly, about Lok Sabha and election, there was this question. Right to vote, Election Commission again is very important, and particularly this year, since it's an election year, you could get anything related to the composition of Election Commission and its powers, etc. Questions on governor was there, discretionary powers of governor, then governor and the immunity and other powers of governor. Governor and when he or she makes a customary address to the members of the house. Then the Sarkaria Commission between center and state, there was a question. President's rule, when the Article 356 is imposed on a state, how will be the situation? That was a question. Then the size of the Vidhan Parishad. So Vidhan Parishad is the upper house in the state. Some of the states in India have this dual chamber. So that was the question on that. Then there was this question on home guards who are used in the law and order situation. Then there was a question from the Official Secret Acts. So there could be some questions related to the law and order machineries, and you should have a fair idea about things. Usually whenever there is an amendment or a new change happens, you get such questions. Then back to the judiciary, Supreme Court, there was this question. Independence of judiciary. There was a question on the general jurisdiction of Supreme Court and all. The power of Supreme Court in dispute between center and state comes under its original jurisdiction. Then another power of Supreme Court. A question on Supreme Court judges and their qualification. A retired judge of Supreme Court. There is this particular question. A question on the High Court judges. A question on the judicial review. A process of impeachment which could be applied for in the case of President as well as the case of Supreme Court judges. There was a question on the contempt of court. There was a question again on 9th schedule. Then again another question on the powers of Supreme Court. Then National Judicial Appointment Commission, there was this particular question. A question on bar councils. A question on the Attorney General of India. Another question on the Attorney General of India. Then a question on validity of constitutional amendment and the power of the Supreme Court and High Court to question that. Then there was a question from the writ jurisdiction called the mandamus and quo warranto. There was a question on the National Legal Service Authority. There is this question on the legal service authorities in general. A question on judicial custody. Then a question on parole. There was a single question on the Controller and Auditor General and the powers. A question on Finance Commission, which is also a constitutional body. There was a question on Panchayat Raj, which is again, part of constitution. Another question on Panchayat Raj about their essence. There is this Panchayat extension to scheduled areas and the role of Gram Sabhas in that. Another question from Panchayat about the Panchayat members. Then the Gram Nyayalayas, which actually have the civil as well as the criminal jurisdiction. So another question on local self-government and the spirit behind that. There was a question on the Metropolitan Planning Committee, which was very specific. Then there was a question on the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. Then the Community Reserve question and this question we already seen that. So from almost all areas of the constitution you could see that there are questions. You should pay particular attention to the spirit of constitution. Then of course the fundamental rights and directive principles as well as the parliament. This being the election year, you should pay particular attention to the election commission as well, and generally you should check judiciary and Panchayat Raj. So let's move on to the other areas other than the constitution in the polity segment. There was a questions on rule of law in general. So related to this freedom and law and restriction, these are all in a way direct to the spirit of constitution area, but these are not exactly limited to our own constitution. Then there was a question on the bureaucracy. There was a question on which among the following are not constitutional bodies. So Planning Commission, which is no more there. Development Council, Zonal Council, they are all extra constitutional bodies. There was this question on National Development Council, which is no more there. Then Financial Stability and Development Council, there was a question. There was a question on economic and social planning in general. There was a question on Union Territories. There was a question on the Delimitation Commission. There's been some articles in the recent times. So you could pay attention, like when exactly is the next, based on the next census only there will be a delimitation happening. So you should have a fair idea about that. This is a potential question for your mains this year. Then functions of Cabinet Secretariat, there was a question. There was a question on Chief Secretaries, something from the administrative side of the government. Then there was a question on this principles of inclusive governance, and there was a question on right to education as well. So you could see that most of the questions in the polity segment are from the constitution, but there are some other things, and especially if you have covered your mains GS paper 2, there you would have covered not only the constitution but the governance as well as the administration part of it as well. In that case, you will be in a better position to handle this. I would say a total of when you combine this polity and international relations together, most of the questions are answerable. Some of the questions are like confusing, especially the spirit of constitution kind of question. So you have to pay attention, you have to weigh each and every options before you come to the conclusion. Especially I would like you to cross check the last 5 years question paper to get a feel of the important areas. So once you've done your revision, polity and international relations will not be a big problem for you. So all the best and thank you for the watch.